It's a pleasure to be here with you. I'd like to just begin with our traditional brief prayer, the Fatiha. Most of you will be familiar with that. Just if you can join us, it would be good together. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Maliki yawmiddin. Iyaka na'budu wa iyaka nasta'een. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين. So today I would like to share with you some things about Mevlana Rumi's practice and his how he developed, how he transformed some of the stories about his meetings with his teacher, Mawlana Shamsuddin Tabrizi. And what came as appropriate for today is that we'll go through it by selections of his poetry. Things from primarily his Divan, the Divan Kabir. And we'll just see what comes, what's meant for us today. So, to begin with, just a brief introduction to Rumi's transformation. What happened to him? Rumi was a scholar. He was a scholar, and he was also deeply steeped in mysticism through his father's tradition. His father's line went through the great Central Asian Sufi lines of Najmuddin Kobra was his teacher. So he comes from a very ancient and deep strain of Sufism, and so he was a practitioner of Tassawuf, and he was also a judge, a jurisprudence expert. But there was a moment of an inflection point in his life that changed everything, and that was his encounter with a really mysterious wandering dervish that nobody really knows anything about, so much of where he came from and things like that. There's a lot of folklore, but his name was Shamsuddin, and he came from ostensibly Tabriz in Khurasan in Iran. So the meeting with Shamsuddin was something like this. There's several different versions. I'll share with you the version that I think makes sense for our talk today. So Rumi was coming out of his class, basically his circle, and he was being followed by his students, and he was on his mule. And out of nowhere, this dervish comes and grabs a hold of his mule's stirrups and says, "I have a question for you." And people were shocked by his approach, his apparent rudeness. He said, "What's your question?" He said, "Who was greater, Bayezid Bastami or Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him?" And Rumi was shocked, at the kind of question. He goes, "Well, of course, the Prophet." He said, "Then how is it that Bayezid was one of the great Sufis of very old 9th century? So how is it that he said, 'Glory be to me,' and the Prophet said, 'Glory be to you, we have not known you as you ought to be known'?" And Rumi was dumbfounded. He was stuck. He didn't know what to say. He had no answer for that question. But then suddenly, the answer came. And he said, "Because Bayezid took one sip from the ocean and was satisfied, while the Prophet, no matter how much he was given to drink of that ocean, was never completely full. He was always seeking more, deeper and deeper." And then he fainted. After he said that, he fainted. And when he revived, they asked him about what happened. And he said, when Shams asked me that question, all of what I knew failed me. And I had no answer. I didn't know what to say. I was really stuck. And then I felt a light penetrate my heart, suddenly. And the answer flowed directly to my heart, without me thinking about it. My capacity for thought froze. But then suddenly, the answer came. And he said it. He said the answer. And that was his transformation. And this is what often happens with Sufi encounters, is that it's a deconstruction of our intellect and our habitual thoughts and what we think we know. A real teacher comes and he just breaks us down. And that's what Shamsuddin did to Rumi. He asked him a question that tore apart whatever he thought he knew. And he didn't know. But he was opened by the question to something much deeper than what he was carrying. And from that moment on, he knew he had to be with Shams. And for about 3 years, they had what's known as a sohbat, which is a intimate conversation together. And they spent so much time together. And Shamsuddin imparted to him what he was carrying. And he was looking for someone. Shamsuddin was traveling, looking for the person who can take what he had, who can receive it. And they spent time, and that was the change. And the Rumi that we know came out of this encounter. And the path was the path of love. What Rumi refers to often as the mazhab-i ishq, the way of love, the religion of love. So this is essential Islam. The path of love is essential Islam, and it's known today as Sufism. It wasn't always known as Sufism, but now we call it Sufism. And what it is that it's a path of knowledge and wisdom and love that's existed for all of human history. From the very beginning of human consciousness, this path, this way of knowing and way of being has been with us. And it's rooted in the prophetic tradition. The chain of transmission is from Adam all the way through to Prophet Muhammad. All of the prophets were on this path. All of the great human beings who carried this knowledge and imparted it to humanity were on this path. And it's not Islam with a capital I. It's a way of being. It's a state of the heart. That's essential Islam, is that it's not an identity as it's become now for those of us who grew up in the Islamic tradition or who have entered it. And it is characterized by a reality. And that reality is God, divine, the divine reality. That the center of existence is not me. It's not the human ego. But God, the truth, Haqq, is the center of that reality. And it's characterized also by a radical state of surrender. A real submission. A letting go of all of the things that we are carrying, the burdens, what's called in the Quran the chains or the burdens that are on our backs. You just let them down. And you become in a state of total submission, total openness and receptivity to love. And ultimately, the false self, what is known as nafs, or a state of the nafs, the lower state of the nafs in Sufi knowledge, it dissolves in love. You melt away. So the foundation, what is the foundation of this in Sufism? The Quran, our teacher, Sheikh Kabir, used this term. He said he likes to use modern terms for it. He said the Quran is the operating system of the human soul. I think we're on Quran 2.0 right now, or operating system 2.0. And what it is, what the Quran contains, what the message is, the guidance that's in the Quran is that it says that there is a direct channel between the human being and God. An unmediated channel. That divine knowledge, sacred knowledge, is flowing directly to each one of our hearts. And it tells us, it gives us a framework and a structure to understand our own humanness, of who we really are. The story of Adam, beyond the standard story of Adam, or the meaning of the story of Adam with the serpent and things like that, there's a deeper meaning to it. And it defines and informs us about what it means to be a human being. And why we're here. Why do we exist? And it also tells us about a pre-eternal covenant, that before any of us is embodied in this world, we have a trust is given to us from God directly to each one of us, which is known as, in Sufi law, it's known as the covenant of Alast, where the Quran, there's a very famous verse in the Quran that says, where God addresses all human souls and says, Alastu bi Rabbikum, am I not your Rabb, am I not your Lord? And all of us said yes. Before we come in this world, every one of us says, yes, you are. And that's the pre-eternal covenant. All of us have that. We're carrying this knowledge in the core of our being, that we have a sustainer, that we have this connection. We have something much greater than ourselves and what we imagine ourselves to be. And that God, this Rabb of ours, is closer to us than ourselves. That this relationship is weaved into our very core. It's not something that we can separate, not something that we can say, here it is, here is God and here is me. It's very intimately weaved in the fabric of who we are. What that relationship is defined by is unconditional love, which in the Quran is Rahmah. The beginning of the Quran is Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. And Rahmah, that word Rahmah, is really unconditional love. Because it flows whether we deserve it or not, whether it's not dependent on us or anything that we do. It's always flowing. It's the primary relationship governing the Creator with the creation. Is unconditional love. And the way to know this, the way to bring this alive in us, is through what is called remembrance. In Quranic terminology, zikr. Zikrullah. To remember. So it's something latent in us, or that we already know because of this pre-eternal covenant, but we forget. Our embodiment in this world takes us in a direction of heedlessness and forgetfulness and social conditioning and all of the things that govern our existence in this world. But the remembrance, the zikr of Allah, is the key to returning. That's what can bring us back and bring this knowing alive in us again. And the Quran in many different places speaks very clearly about the importance of listening, that there's a call, that we're always being called. But we have to have the ears to hear it, to listen to it. That we're always being drawn back to our origin, drawn back to this love. But the noise of the world and the noise of our habits, the noise of our defensiveness, drowns that call out. But it's always there and it never stops. Okay? So that's the operating system of the human soul. That's the guidance that's contained in the Quran. And there's a lot more, but this is good enough for now. Right? And this takes us beyond belief and identity. The practice, what made Rumi who he was to go beyond belief and identity. This has nothing to do with believing something. It has nothing to do with a doctrine or rules or anything like that. And it has nothing to do with who we think we are. What develops in the human being when undertaking these practices, when traveling on this path, is you develop these three things: a certainty and trust in a spiritual reality. You start knowing that you really do have a sustainer, you really do have a Rabb. Beyond the conception of God, which is always an idol. Whatever we conceive of God, He's not that. And that's the meaning of La ilaha illallah in Islamic understanding, is that whatever we think God is, He's not that. Whatever we imagine what the divine is, it's more than that. He's beyond gender, beyond our imagination, beyond what our parents taught us. But we develop that. If you follow this path, you start knowing with certainty, and you start trusting in this spiritual reality. You actually start seeing it in your own life, within you. You start knowing, not believing, but knowing that there's something that's holding you, something that's guiding you, something that's healing your heart. And you start developing a mindfulness, what we call presence, a mindfulness that governs our actions. So we're not on automatic pilot, we're not asleep, we're not just acting out of habit and repetitive patterns that we've developed in our lives. We act from a very different place. Our behavior comes from somewhere else. Because we are able to detach from our thoughts and our memories and our emotions and witness something greater than my little I, and act from a place greater than this little I and my own self-interest. And love of God, love of this reality, governs our hearts. Not love of things, not love of what I want, what I wish for, but love of God. It's a very different love, not beyond sentimental love, beyond the Hollywood image of what love is, or what we read in romantic books, or what we're told. It's a very different kind of love. But that governs our heart, our hearts are immersed in that, our inner life. By heart I mean our inner life. How we know is the heart of a human being. The meaning of things in us is what's known as heart in this tradition. And then worship becomes a real service. We become a servant. We become what's called Abdullah, which is the highest station of a human being. The Prophet, peace be upon him, his ultimate station was to become Abdullah. That's like the greatest thing that any of us can attain, is to be servants, to be real servants to God, to this reality, which is beyond ritual. Right? Worship, now we understand worship to be, I do certain things and then I get points, I accumulate these points and I go to heaven. But that's not it. Worship as service is something else. Because that kind of thinking has to do with reward and punishment and conditioning. But to become a real servant without expectation is something else. So this is essential religion. Right? The essential religion, the fitra, what's known as fitra, how God, the nature in which we are come to existence. Before we get conditioned, before we're given the carrot and stick of social conditioning and what our parents tell us, what makes us good and what makes us bad, and what we learn in school and all of these things, there's something called fitra in the Quran. This fitra is our innate human nature. And that's the deen, that's the religion, what's known as religion. Okay? And this religion, this guidance, has to do with purification of our heart. That what happens to us when we become, Mahmoud and Fatih, and we have an identity, is that our heart becomes rusted. It's rusted with accumulation of things of this world. Habits, fears, defensiveness, negative experiences, painful things that might happen to us, disappointments. All of that stuff accumulates and buries our inner life in all of this junk that we're carrying. But we think it's real. We think our memories are actually now. We think whatever hurt we're carrying is still with us. And essential religion works on purifying that, removing these things, so that we can see and really experience life as the loving, joyful reality that it is. And this is not some romantic notion. It's not like nothing is wrong, or that we don't suffer, or we don't feel pain. But the meaning of it becomes very different. Okay? Metaphorically, it's called polishing the mirror, that each one of us reflects this divine light, this divine reality is inside. And the more we polish, the mirror is rusted so you can't see. And mirrors here in 1,000 years ago were metal, not glass, so you have to polish it so you can see something. You have to polish it to see that divine light, so that it will emanate from within. And what Mevlana Rumi says, opening an inner window, that there's a connection. Each one of us has this divine connection at the core of our being. And the work of essential religion is to open a window so that we can actually experience that relationship directly. And so deen, religion, can be understood as what binds our lives, what defines our whole life. It's not rules and regulations and beliefs and doctrines. It's actually what, how we live our life is our religion, is our essential religion. And it goes from the purification of the heart ultimately to, it becomes the science of witnessing the face of God, of shahada, that we become what's known today as martyr. So its inner meaning is to die to ourselves, and we become witnesses to this reality, where we see this divine countenance clearly. So this is what Mevlana Rumi has to say in relationship to this. He says, "The window of my soul opens, and from the purity of the unseen world, the book of God comes to me directly. The book, the rain of divine grace and the light are falling into my house through a window from my real and original source. From my real and original source. The house without a window is hell. To make a window is the essence of true religion. Don't thrust your axe upon every thicket. Come, use your axe to cut open a window." You hear that? It's kind of shocking, right? To say, the book of God comes directly to me. But he's speaking the truth, because he has experienced that divine communication, that tanzil that's constantly coming from what is real, this reality that governs the entire universe, directly to a human's heart. So this is the purpose of spiritual practice, or any genuine spiritual practice, is this opening of a window, so that we can open our heart to receive divine guidance, so that we can listen, we can hear that innate guidance that's constantly flowing constantly informing us, trying to bring us back to who we really are. And to realize our humanness. This is our birthright. To actually be guided directly, to experience that incredible beauty and unconditional love is our birthright as human beings. The children of Adam, that's what we are supposed to be, is that. And then it's integration. It's, we have a term in Islam that's called Tawheed. Muslims like to be known as Muwahhidun. And it has become known to say that means you say there's no God but God. But it's more than that. Tawheed, that term, means to make things into one, to integrate. And someone who is a muwahhid is someone who does that. To take the fragmented world that we live in and integrate it into a oneness. So we are one. And the universe is one. It's the reflection of the oneness of God is to live in that reality. And the transformation of the ego self, what we call the lower nafs, into the self of light. So that we see the mirror is polished and the light is directly in our hearts. And what that does to us is it emancipates us. It emancipates us from fear and sorrow. What the Quran says repeatedly is that the friends of God shall have no fear nor sorrow. We become free. We become real human beings. That's the purpose of spiritual practice. And this is the practice that Mevlana went through and all Sufis ultimately go through. So he has a beautiful way of describing this, which is called the House of Love. I'll read you this poem now. He says, "Why is there always music in this house? Ask the owner if you can find him. But sometimes too do idols appear inside the Kaaba of your heart. Just as sometimes God's light penetrates the idolater's temple. Here, in the human heart, here is a treasure this world could not contain. The house and its landlord are all pretext and play. Hands off this house, this talisman. Don't argue with the landlord. He's drunk every night. The dirt and garbage are musk and rose. The roof and door are music and verse. In short, whoever finds this house is ruler of the world, the Solomon of his time. Look down, Lord, from the roof. Bless us with your glance. I swear, since seeing your face, the whole world is a fraud and fantasy. The garden is bewildered as to what is leaf or blossom. The distracted birds can't distinguish the bird seed from the snare. A house of love with no limits. A presence more beautiful than Venus or the moon. A beauty whose image fills the mirror of the heart. Come in, the beloved is here. We are all drunk. No one notices the door in the dark, wandering. Those drunk with God, even if they are 1,000, live as one. But drunk with lust, even one is double. Enter the thickets of lions, unafraid of any wounds. The shadows you fear are just a child's fantasy. There is no wound and nothing to be wounded. all is mercy and love. But you build up thought like a massive wooden door. Set fire to the wood, silence the noise of the heart, hold your harmful tongue. So what is he describing? He's describing the inner life, the heart of the human being. He's giving us insight about what it's like to be living in this state, and what are the things that keep us from living in that state. When he says here, you remember what he said? Here is what? Pointing to his heart. Is a treasure this world could not contain. Anybody know what he's referring to? It's a hadith where it says, hadith is a saying of the Prophet where he says, the whole world cannot contain me. God says, this is God speaking. He says, the whole world cannot contain me, but the heart of the person of faith can contain me. Not can, but does, contains me. Okay? A treasure this world could not contain. So he's telling us that. And that everything is an expression of beauty. The garbage is musk. The pain is joy and love. He's speaking about a change in how the meaning of our life changes. It doesn't mean that there is no garbage. He's not saying there's no garbage. He's not saying there's no pain. He's not saying we won't suffer. But the meaning of it becomes love, becomes beauty, becomes unconditional love. Because whatever we experience is a step towards this guidance and purification of our hearts, a step closer to who we really are. He's talking about the limitless expansiveness, that this heart, our hearts are capable of containing God. How infinite is that? Beyond infinity, isn't it? There's no end, no limit. And it's inside of us. And it's unity. There's unification that you can sense in this poem, the Tawheed, that a thousand who are drunk are one, drunk with divine love. But when we are drunk with lust, everything is double, everything is fragmented. Life is not such a good thing. It's full of negative experiences. And then he says, what else? He says, enter the thicket of lions. He's telling you that this house is not such a, it's not all just roses, right? It's a place that requires courage to travel, to actually know this house, know your heart. You have to face a lot of things that are hard to face in ourselves. He says it. He says, enter the thicket of lions, unafraid of any wounds. Stop avoiding things. Stop pretending that your pain is not there, that your negative memories are not there, because they get bigger and bigger the more we ignore them. He's saying, face it. Enter the thicket of lions. And then he gives us hope. There is no wound and nothing to be wounded. What we imagine is so difficult. If we really are polishing the heart, it changes. But our thoughts is a massive door keeping us away from this house. Thoughts here meaning our memories, our habits, conditioning, the constant noise, that's the constant inner conversation that's telling us whatever it is that it's telling us. you're no good, you're not loved, you screwed up again. Right? Nobody really wants you here. Why is life so hard? Why can't I have what I want? That dialogue is constantly running, building this massive defensive barrier to keep us from what is real. So he's telling us that, the house of love. And then what is this love? So let's see what he says about love, which is beyond maybe what we imagine. He says, by love, what is bitter becomes sweet. Bits of copper turn to gold. By love, the dregs are made clear, and pain begins to heal. By love, the dead come alive, and the king becomes a slave. This love, moreover, is the fruit of knowledge. No fool will ever sit on the throne of love. When did the lack of knowledge ever give birth to this love? No, ignorance only falls in love with what is lifeless. It thinks it sees in something lifeless the appearance of the one it desires, as if it heard the beloved whistle. A lack of knowledge cannot discern. It mistakes a flash of lightning for the sun. Lightning is transient and faithless. Without clearance, you will not know the transient from the permanent. Why is lightning said to laugh? It's laughing at whoever sets his heart upon its light. The lights of the sky are feeble. They are not like the light that is neither of the east nor the west. Regard that lightning as something which takes away the sight, and regard the eternal light as a helper. You hear what he's trying to say to us? The real love, the love that heals our hearts and transforms us, is born of wisdom. They are together, they're not separate. Because these are all divine attributes that must manifest in us if we are to become human, become really human. That it's rooted in knowledge, rooted in deep knowing of who we really are. Not book knowledge, but self-knowledge. There's a famous saying of the Prophet and Imam Ali that says, the one who knows themselves knows their Lord. And he's talking about that this real love is transformative. It heals us. It makes us a different human being. The way that we lived our life before this love can enter our hearts or flow from us, we become a very different human being. Because the meaning of who we are changes. And the meaning of our experience in life changes. And he says discernment. Right? Discernment is so important. Knowing truth from falsehood. And the world and our conditioning and our habits are very deceptive. They appear as real. Right? And sometimes it's hard to imagine that they're not. But this love, and this, if it's born of wisdom, wisdom allows us to discern, to know what is true from what is false. And it keeps us away from what Mevlana Rumi says is the snare of how the bird catcher catches the prey. because they make it sound like a real bird, right? They make a sound to attract the bird, and they make it look like this sustenance, something that the bird likes, and boom, we're done. The bird is done, right? And that's what material life and being enslaved to our habits and conditioning is the same thing. It's a trap. He's trying to get us away from that, make us wake up to realize that this is not real. That's not who we are. We're not the sum of our memories. We're not the sum of what our possessions are, what we accumulate in this life. We're not the sum of what we gain and lose. We're something else. Something much greater than that. And what this love born of wisdom, it's a complete renovation of our inner life. It's like taking a gutted building and making it into something very beautiful. He takes us now to a little bit of a different understanding, or a different area to become aware of, which has to do with human will. So let's, because now we have a choice. You start thinking about, well, what's up to me? This, how do I seek? How do I understand? How do I get this knowledge? And there's a conundrum here of what's me and what's God when we're not awake. So he addresses that by this poem as an example. Let's see what he says. He says, "O my sustainer," he's calling on God, "deliver me from this imprisonment of free will." I know this is going to be a little problematic, but we'll talk about what he means by free will. He says, "Deliver me from this imprisonment of free will. The one-way pull on the straight path is better than the two-way pull of perplexity or confusion. Though you are the only goal of these two ways, ultimately it's the same. Still, this duality is agonizing to the spirit. Though the destination of these two ways is you alone, still the battle is never like the banquet. Listen to the explanation God gave in the Quran. They shrank from bearing it." This is the trust, the pre-eternal covenant we talked about. That the mountains in the Quran, it says the mountains and all of the great things of this world shrank away from this trust, but the human being accepted it. They shrank away from bearing it. This perplexity in the heart is like war. When a man is perplexed, he says, "I wonder whether this is better for my situation or that." In perplexity, the fear of failure and the hope of success always are in conflict with each other, advancing and retreating. From you came this ebb and flow within me. Otherwise, this sea of mine would be still. From that source, you gave me this perplexity. Likewise now, graciously give me clarity. So what is this free will he's talking about? Is he telling us we have no choice? We're just led like donkeys by the nose? What do you think? In the Quran, there's a verse that's often repeated. And all of these poems really are Rumi's, like, the understanding that came from his intimacy with the Quran. In the Quran it says, وَمَا تَشَاءُونَ إِلَّا أَنْ يَشَاءَ اللَّهُ. It says, you do not will unless God wills. Or you can read it in a different way to say, you do not will, but God wills. Or whatever you think you're willing, it is really within God's will. It's not outside of that. Because the great confusion in our hearts, in our lives, comes from feeling that I am the center of the universe. Right? Because I have a body and I have an identity, I imagine that everything happens, that I'm the center of everything that happens. Everything happens because of me, and everything happens to me. Right? Isn't that how we are? That's how we live our life most of the time, imagining that we are God. We are the center of reality. And remember in the very beginning we said that the radical, the essential Islam is to go beyond that. To make God the center of reality, not me. And that's the freedom that he's talking about. That once we accept that, once we know that, we realize that we're a part of something much greater, that we started from pre-eternity. We're not this, and we are, but also not. We're not this person sitting here talking to you. I went through so many transformations, all of us, right? And I'm going to go through a bunch of other transformations, and it just keeps going. But we imagine that I'm it, this is it. And that causes this confusion and this suffering. The noise, the sea becomes, the inner sea is in turmoil. So he's asking God, he says, make me quiet. Take away this constant nagging habit of thinking I'm it. That it's me. That what happens is entirely up to me. Instead of I am a channel that God's will acts through. So I put in this quote to follow up on this poem is that what that does when we realize, when we come to the state of knowing that everything is really God's manifestation. Everything that happens to us and in existence is manifestation of divine attributes. It's God's creative power in action. That can take us from the bondage of thinking it's all up to me to real servanthood, to realize that I am an instrument in divine hands, and that I'm serving. It's not for my interest, it's not up to me, it's not because of me, but I'm part of something much, much vaster, much greater than who I am. Okay? And he says this, he says this is one of Mevlana's sayings. He says the angels are free because of their knowledge, and the beasts because of their ignorance. Between the two remains the children of Adam to struggle. So we are the threshold between these two worlds, the world of animal and the world of angel. The human being is between those two. And we're greater than those two, because we are also, even though he says, free me of this prison of free will, we also have a choice. We're given a choice. We can choose, which is not the same as will. We're given a choice. We can choose to surrender. Right? But it can't happen unless God wills it. But it can't happen unless we also choose it. So it's kind of a paradox, right? So in between these two worlds, we're at a threshold. The heart is the threshold between two worlds. The heart of the human being. We're connected directly and always to this world and the other world. And we are always experiencing it. Sometimes we imagine this other world comes only after we physically die, but that's not really true. The other world is constantly here. And this is according to the Quran. Quran has an ayah that says, the garden, paradise, and the fire exist for as long as heaven and earth exist. That tells us something. So, these worlds, but when we are out of this material body, things we see with a different seeing and know with a different knowing. but they're always there. And the human being is the threshold between those two, constantly fluctuating. So let's see what he says about the other world and how it relates to us and to his state of being, somebody who's in this practice. So he says, the scent of the garden and the roses keeps on coming. The scent of the kind friend, with a capital F, keeps on coming. My friend is scattering pearls to me, so the ocean's water keeps on rising up in me. With the image of his rose garden, the field of brambles keeps on seeming softer than silk. With such a carpenter, I mean his love, a ladder to heaven keeps on coming. From the Spirit's kitchen, my hungry dog, moment by moment, catches the scent of bread. From the doors and walls of the lane of the friend, the scent of the Spirit keeps on coming to the lovers. The scent, the taste. Bring an act of faithfulness and take 100,000. From such as this, such as that keeps on coming. Everyone who dies before the beauty of the friend's face keeps entering paradise, not having died. The caravan of the unseen comes before the eyes, but it stays hidden from these ugly ones. How should lovely women come to ugly men? The nightingale always comes to the rose bush. The jasmine grows next to the narcissus. The rose comes to the sweet-mouthed bud. All of these are symbols. I mean that the other world keeps coming into this world. Like cream hidden in the soul of milk. No place keeps coming into place. Like intellect concealed in blood and skin. This is a different intellect now, not the mind. Like intellect concealed in blood and skin, the traceless keeps on entering into traces. And from beyond the intellect, beautiful love keeps on coming, skirt dragging, a cup of wine in hand. And from beyond love, that indescribable one, who can only be called that, keeps on coming. I could explain more than this, but jealousy keeps on throwing its spear. I'll stop because difficult words about him throw everyone into 100 doubts. Can you hear the expansiveness of inner life that Rumi feels when he talks about the other world and this world and what he actually is speaking of? How vast his inner life is. And we have that capacity, we have the same capacity to experience that in our own way. And the unseen world, when he says the other world keeps coming into this world, he's talking about the ever ongoing manifestation of divine qualities. That God's manifestation in creation is always flowing. This incredible diversity, incredible beauty, and incredible pain and suffering that's in this world are all divine qualities manifesting. And it can never stop. It can never end because God is living. God is life. He's the one who's alive. And so existence must be. And it must be endless and ongoing. Qualities keep coming. They keep coming. They keep coming, never ends. And they're reflected through us. Reflected through all creation, but particularly through the human being. And it takes us to another important aspect of spiritual practice. What happens to us when we travel this path, which we like to call making beautiful, which is the ultimate, the pinnacle of religion, of religious state. In Islamic understanding is what's called ihsan. Ihsan is the highest level of faith or being on this path. And ihsan literally means making beauty. The word husn means beauty. It has come to mean more like doing good things, which it includes that. But it's at its root, it means beauty. Someone who is Hasan is someone who's beautiful. And so ihsan is the actual active bringing beauty into existence, which is the ultimate function of a human being. To make things beautiful, to bring it, manifest it into this world. And then the idea of turning and returning, that there's a return, right? You read it and you heard it in saying that it keeps coming. And it's a call. God is always calling us back to the original source. We're always being pulled. There's a longing in us to return. And it's, the symbol of that is the Mevlevi whirling. It's the constant turning around the human heart and the returning to the center. And then he says this: the friend wishes me to get out of myself. He wishes me to live in freedom, the emancipation we talked about. I was constantly involved with ambition, and now he tells me to break all the chains. Break all the chains. Just give it up. Go beyond what I want, what I wish for, and just be. So ultimately, what is this? There's a dying here. He's saying, for those who die, in this world, experience something beyond death in this world. Which takes us to this poem. He says, listen or drop. Give yourself up without regret. And in exchange, gain an ocean. Listen or drop. Bestow upon yourself this honor, and in the arms of the sea be secure. Who indeed should be so fortunate? An ocean wooing a drop. In God's name, sell and buy at once. Give a drop and take this sea full of pearls. No, he's referring to the human being as the drop. Right? And the drop is no different than the ocean itself. But he's saying, just give yourself up and gain the entire ocean. Get past thinking it's just me. And know that I am something much greater than just this body. And I belong to something much vaster. And you can hear from this poem that love is seeking us. The ocean is seeking us. It's giving us a really incredible deal. The bargain of all bargains. The opportunity to die before we die. Before we leave this physical existence, to actually let go of the things that are keeping us from becoming the ocean, or go back to the ocean. And these are all, again, weaved from the substance of the Quran. You know, this bargain that he talks about is a really beloved verse in the Quran to Sufis that says, God has purchased from the faithful ones their souls and possessions in return for the garden. That's what he's talking about. He says, take the deal, take it now, don't wait. You know, die now, because the rest of the verse says they slay and are slain. And that's a promise. It's a promise from God. So he's saying, just take it, take this bargain. You will not lose. Come back, return to your source. And all this stuff sounds good, but it's not so easy. So he talks again about, I'm going to share another poem with you where he says that love, this love is really hard. See what he says. He says, intellect is the traveler's chain, my child. Our mind is the chain, keeping us from traveling this path, weighing us down. Break your bonds, the road is clear. Intellect a bond, the heart a trap, the spirit a veil. Everything is not real. The road is hidden from all these three, my son. When you rise up from intellect, spirit, and heart, then for certain you will still live in doubt. Damn. Even if you go beyond all of those things, you're still going to live in doubt. You're not going to get away from it. The fantasy we have that somehow, we will reach a state where we are free from this is wishful thinking. We're constantly in this world, but we can experience something beyond this world. A man who has not left himself is no man. Love without pain is a fantasy. Love without pain is a fantasy. Make your breast the target before the friend. Be quick, his arrow's in the bow. When that arrow strikes a person's breast, 100 marks appear upon his face, my child. Love is not the work of the soft-hearted. Love is the work of champions, my son. He who becomes the servant of the lovers is an emperor blessed by the stars. Ask no one about love, ask love. Love is a cloud raining pearls, my child. It has no need for me to speak of it. Love speaks for itself, my child. If you want to rise to the seventh heaven, love makes a fine ladder, my son. Wherever a caravan goes, love is the caravan's qibla, the direction. Do not let this world trick you away from love, my child, for this world is busy fleeing from you. All right, close your mouth and be silent as a clam, for the tongue is the enemy of your spirit, my child. The son of Tabriz has come and the spirit rejoices, for it has joined the constellation of its son. But love, just ask love about love. It's beyond our ability to express. Love without pain is a fantasy. What do you think he's saying about making your breast the target? There's a something that our teacher has one of the real blessings and nuggets of wisdom that he's given us is to say this, that love is not the goal, love is the cause of all things. We tend to think of love, I want love, right? I want to find love, I want to feel love. Right? It's something worth searching for. And he says no, love is not that. Love is the cause of everything. And maybe you can hear it in these words of Mevlana. And then there's a constant refrain in Mevlana's words of saying, you can hear it, take me from myself, take me from me to you. You feel this, I think you feel this, right? This real longing to just be freed, to return. And he's trying to awaken that in us, make us feel it too, make us really hear this longing in our hearts to come back, that there's something so magnificent inside of us to be known, to be felt. And when he says, let the arrow strike, what do you think he's talking about? He gives this metaphor of God, the bow is ready, just come. You have, don't run away. Because most of the time we're just running away, we're afraid. Our defenses are up. We're not sure, is this really real? He's saying just take the arrow. You won't be sorry. Accept the pain that comes with love. Don't run away from it. But don't wait. Be quick. Don't hesitate. And what does he say? Know, he tells you, know that this world is fleeing from you. What we're holding on to, the cause of our fear, is our attachment to this world. But it's running away from us. One of the wisdoms of Imam Ali to his son, he told him this, he said, my son, know that from your first breath, from the moment you enter this world is leaving you, and the other world is coming to you. So don't occupy yourself with what is fleeing from you and forget about what's coming to you. And he's saying silence, right? Close your mouth and be silent as a clam. Shut up. Quiet the inner dialogue. If you want to hear, if you want to really know love, if you want to hear what love has to say about love, shut your mouth. Shut the inner voice. Where does all this ultimately take us? There's a poem, this is probably my favorite one, where the ultimate humanness is expressed, to me, is expressed in this one. He says this, with your sweet soul, the soul of mine has merged as water does with wine. Who can part the water from the wine, or me from you when we combine? You have become my greater self. How can smallness limit me? You've taken on my being. How shall I not take on yours? Forever you have claimed me, that forever I may know you're mine. Your love has pierced me to the depths. Its ecstasy entwines both bone and nerve. I rest as a ney laid upon your lips. A ney is the reed flute. As an oud I lie against your breast. Oud is a string instrument. Breathe deeply in me that I may sigh. Strike upon my strings and tears glisten. Sweet are my tears and sweet my sighs. Worldly joys I return to the world. You remain in my inmost soul, whose depths the mirrored heavens reflect. O pearl in this mussel shell, O diamond in my darkest mine, in you this honey is dissolved. O milk of life, so mild, so fine. Our sweetnesses all merged in you, sweet in infant smiles. You crush me into rose oil, drop by drop. Nor do I complain beneath the press. In your sweet pain, pain dissolves. For I, your rose, had this intent. You bade me blossom upon your robe, and made me for all eyes your sign. And when you pour me upon this world, it blooms in beauty fully divine. That's it. That's what it means to be human. Crushed into nothingness. Thank you. Yes.
So, I think you should take this opportunity to put as many questions as are coming up in your hearts to Mahmoud. So, yes.
A lot of discussion about, obviously, how the original meaning of the Quran can only be interpreted fully if you understand Arabic. And that obviously, if you're working from an English translation or translated to another language, you're reliant on the translator. And obviously, there are different meanings. Now, I'm presuming that the original poems were written in Arabic.
Farsi. Most of them are in Farsi. Farsi. Iran.
So is it the case then that there is once again meaning lost in the translation? Because often we're hearing English today, and is it the case that effectively there are nuances that are being lost? That the only way you can gain that would be to learn it in the original language, or is it the case that in actual fact you can rely on the translations to pass on the essential meaning?
So it's a question about translations and whether the English rendering of the original Persian text is really doing it justice.
Also the Quran.
And similarly applied to the Quran, the same question, that whether it's possible to, whether it's important to know Arabic to be able to really understand the Quran and to engage with it.
In a strict sense, yes. I mean, that's with all translations, no? Because once you translate something, you have to make choices about meaning, right? And then all other meanings are gone, right? And new meanings appear, right? Because now the reader of it in a different language, each one of us understands things differently, right? So in a sense, that's true. And you want, if you can go back to the original, you'll get a closer taste, right? But that's okay, because you remember what we said in the very beginning, that it's a direct channel of communication. It's not dependent on reading. You know, it depends on your capacity for listening. Then you will receive what is meant for you to receive. You know, this whole symbolism of the path about being a journey, and you're traveling and you're returning to your origin. It's a journey back to where you started from. You know, part of this whole metaphor is that you're journeying in a vast wasteland. That life is vast, and if you don't know the path, you will get lost hopelessly. But also, once your intention is clear and you're traveling and you're following a guidance, you're given the provisions you need for each step. In Maulana's case, his provision was exactly what he needed when he needed it. Shams appeared, things happen, meanings come, and you take it. If you're receptive, you will get what's meant for you. And you don't need to be so concerned about, am I handicapped in some way? Is my lack of knowing a certain language, does that put me at a disadvantage? That's still following in the line of, I'm going to think my way through this. The whole thing, everything that Mawlana is saying to us is, open up, just listen to inwardly. He says the last where he says, don't ask me about love, ask love, right? So what is also true is that the Quran as a sacred text contains within it mysteries that when you get intimate with it, and that's true of all sacred texts, it opens something up inside of you. And I think that's available whether it's in original language or not, because it's really a quality of you, of your clarity. Okay. I don't know if that answered your question or not.
Thank you. Gentleman in the front row had a question.
I was just going to ask if I would be correct in assuming that on one level, Maulana's poetry is about love, is about giving up yourself to be one with God. On a level of enjoying the poetry itself, would it require greater knowledge of Quran, of the Islamic traditions, prophets, ways, and a search of cultural, perhaps, awareness of the times to fully enjoy the poetry? Because if there are images, if there are symbols there, it's like reading T.S. Eliot's Wasteland without being a Roman Catholic.
Yeah, yes, to an extent this is true, but how did you enjoy the poetry? Did you receive some? And yes, the more you're, and language has to do with culture and history, and so all of these things, yes, are true. There's some things that if you're not steeped or aware, at least aware to some level of, Islamic symbolism and Quranic verses, and because a lot of it is just, it's so intimately weaved in that, and immersed in that you're going to get a different perspective. But love is universal. This rahmah is universal. It's not dependent on language. It's beyond language. He's trying to take us to a realm that is before the word is spoken. The realm where he says, the book of God comes to me directly. How shocking is that? That sounds blasphemous, doesn't it? He's saying the book comes directly to me. Is he claiming? What's he claiming? And it's not just for him, for all of us. The book comes directly to each one of us if we listen. And again, he's referring, you can see it, referring to the Quran where it says, read your book. It's an imperative, divine imperative. Read your book. Quran says that. Read your book. You are sufficient witness over yourself. And one of the we had a great teacher in Turkey. His name was Shafiq Jan. One of the last Ottoman Sufis, and I had the good fortune of meeting one of his students, and I was with him in the taxi, and I was asking about how he came to know Shafiq Jan Effendi and things like this. He told me this really touching story. He said, I went one time to visit him because I heard he was a real scholar. And when I went to his house, I found this huge library of books, all these books, fantastic books. And I looked at them and I was really, I wanted to read all these books. And I said, Shafiq Jan, Effendi, I wish I had all these books. I wish I could read all these books. And he looked at me and said, my son, the only book you need to read is the book of yourself. So when he said that to me, I knew I had to be with him.
So, question here with Dahir. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. Right, yes. Am I correct in saying that it's God's mercy that He not only sent the Quran in this world by itself, but He sent a person with it, a teacher, who could clarify to us the context of its application and leave very little or no room for confusion. And till this day, we still have his teachings, not only in written, but also the heritage of the teachers that we have even till this day. And if the person seeks and looks for answers, they will find even to this day people and teachers who can give them better understanding of the Quran.
Yes, and remember one of the very early slides in here is that this essential Islam is rooted in the prophetic tradition, right? And the Sufi path is a continuation of that, and all genuine teachers are connected in a chain back to that tradition, and they're carrying the light of the Prophet in their hearts, and the more clear their hearts are, the closer they are to the character of the Prophet, and they can impart that wisdom, that love born of wisdom, directly to us. And it's it can take away a lot of confusion, because the reality of our world is that people cause a lot of confusion no matter what, no matter how clear things are, or there's going to be different opinions and different things, but there's always the opportunity to connect to that stream, the genuine stream of prophethood that makes no distinction between prophets, that looks at divine guidance as universal, not exclusive, that doesn't compartmentalize God into a person, or speaking a particular language, or some threatening man, father figure, or whatever, or however the different confusions around the world, right? But we can connect, and that stream will never come to an end. It's always going to be, as long as there's a world and there are humans, that chain, that transmission will always be alive. But it's not broad, and it's not mass. It's not a mass movement. It can never be a mass movement. You have to search and have the intention to seek, and then hopefully you can connect it.
Yes, Arifa. Yeah, so Arifa, are you asking Mahmoud, how do we kind of reconcile the love and the conflict in the world? Can we have paradise on earth?
Here and now,
here and now.
Whatever it is.
So, this is like the perennial question, right? And the answer is yes and no. Right? If we listen to Mevlana Rumi's words, he says, love without pain is a fantasy. Wanting things in a certain way is not the same as accepting, which I think is what you're saying, and it is in a way paradoxical. There's a lot of pain and suffering in the world, a lot of ugly things in the world, right? But here's I'll share with you my own understanding and how it seems to me. It's by no means the answer. Okay. If we look at any point in time, we'll have a snapshot of life, right? And so if we look now, we see wars going on, beautiful things going on, all kinds of things. It's like a big, broad canvas of things, right? And if we then use our minds to judge, well, is what I'm looking at good or bad, right? We're going to come up with an answer, right? And it depends very much on our state, what part of the canvas we're experiencing. If we're in the middle of war, middle of suffering and poverty and disease, then that's going to dominate our senses and our experience. Right? If things are going well for us, we'll see a different picture. Right? Both are incomplete. Right? And no matter what we do, it's incomplete, because the only way we can know truth, really know truth, is to see things from the beginning of time until the end of time, everywhere in the universe, for us to actually be able to judge with God's judgment. And we can't do that, can we? Right? So what appears to be a certain thing is only at this moment in time. We have no idea what happened before to bring us there, and what's going to happen next, and what the outcomes will be. Right? And so our capacity to understand is limited by our existence. Right? So what appears to be horrible can actually be something that's seeding life for something much better. Right? Our judgment limits our sense of reality, and it's going to be like that. Right? But it could help to remember that we are like a little flash of life. Right? We're not all of life, but this thing about being reality, God is the center of reality versus I am the center of reality. I am the center of reality tells me, well, I like it like this and I don't like it like that, and why is this happening? And if God is so good, why is He causing so much screw up in the world and so much suffering? That's me being the center of reality, right? And wanting God's job, that I can do a better job than He can. I can create a better world, right? Maybe, I don't know. But the other thing is to remember, that look at the beauty that flowed from Rumi's heart. Do we know the historical context of his life? Rumi lived at a cataclysmic time in history. His family was running away from destruction by the Mongols. They were refugees. Most of the known world to his community was destroyed. Much worse than anything we're seeing today. Much worse. There was a real sense that society was going to become extinct at the hands of the Mongols at that time. The level of destruction, the scope of suffering and destruction and mayhem was, it's like, imagine the worst possible place, and it's all over the world. As far as you can tell, it's all over the world. Right? That's the life. That's the times he was in. And look at what he's talking about. How is that possible? It is possible. It happened. Right? We see it. Right? In the midst of such ugliness and such terror, such beauty can appear, and such wisdom can appear.
Yes.
You said love is the cause and not the goal. But is it wrong to have love as a goal? Is it wrong to have love as a goal?
Is it wrong to have love as a goal?
not wrong. We're trying to make clear things that can help guide our hearts. Right? The danger of saying, is it wrong to have a goal? No. As long as we have life in us, we have desire. Okay? There's no getting away from that. Right? The whole matter is where to focus that energy. Right? But that's the stream of life in us is desire. So what do we desire? And most of the time the desire is misguided, misplaced, right? You know, I want money, you know. My desire is money. I want sex. I want popularity. I want whatever, you know, right? I want a new car, you know. Right? I think that's what I should desire. Right? And it's all distorted seeking of love. Because it's the cause of everything. That's what's motivating us. You know, we want love. We're driven by love. But we imagine that, okay, I'm going to have love if I look a certain way, or if I learn a certain thing, or if I say certain things, right? Which is a very different. But if you say approach it that love is the cause, then that sets things in the right perspective and place. Because the Sufi path, the spiritual practice of Sufism, is not a practice of gaining or accumulating things. You know, it's easy to hear all this stuff and say, I want that. I want to have that, you know? I want this love and wisdom. I want this beauty. That will lead us down the wrong path, because we're once again wanting to accumulate, wanting to have. You know, a genuine spiritual path teaches us to let go of things, not accumulate things. Right? To suscitate love as the cause helps us to stop that urge to accumulate. Helps us to say, well, it's already here. I'm already in the ocean of love. I don't need to keep running after it. I just have to just be present to it. And it's already here, already inside, already in me, already who I am.
Yes?
You mentioned let the arrow strike. Do you have any pointers as to how to let the arrow strike right through, rather than just stopping it halfway or whatever? How to let it strike right through?
Is there a way of allowing the arrow to strike straight through and not stopping kind of midway?
Say yes. You know, I mean, that's what, you know, one of Mevlana's, I remember this one, you know, he says try to lose. Just try to lose, because most of the time we're afraid that something is going to be taken away from us, right? And that limits our dying to things, right? And another place he says, you will not know the majesty of your loving until you know your helplessness. The more we can know how helpless we really are, the more we can take that arrow openly. You know? Okay.
Thank you. I think we have time for perhaps one more. If there's anything burning. Oh, yes, at the front here on the right.
Is there a practical way that you can travel from being a drop at the centre of your universe? Is there a way of quietening the internal dialogue?
Is there a practical way of merging with the drop? Is that a question? To stop being?
To quiet the inner dialogue.
And to quieten the inner dialogue. Yeah.
Yes, there's plenty of practical things. And what we mentioned before, which is the practice of remembrance, where, you know, if you undergo this journey, you can learn how to polish the mirror by what is essentially repetitive resonance of sound. Like you're given a name, usually Allah or something like that, and you keep focusing your attention on that, focusing your attention on breath, and over time you will become quieter on the inside, and then things will happen.
Does he have a way of explaining how light relates to love?
Does he have a way of explaining how light relates to love?
God is the light of heaven and earth. Right? The light is a wave. Huh? It's a vibration, or it's a particle and it's a wave. Right? And it's also a metaphor for this divine guidance. Right? And so the experience of love, this love, right? The experience of this love can, in our nervous system, appear as that way, as a light, and in our inner world as something that illuminates, that makes things clear to you, that removes the shadow.
Thank you, Mahmoud. So I think I have a question for you. My question's about the 99 names of the divine, of God. And in the one sense, we're told that God is ultimately unknowable, but then we have these names. And can you maybe just tell us how that can be, that we have these names, and then at the same time we have this unknowable, that God is unknowable, and that we can't hold that kind of complete knowledge of him, her.
In the Islamic tradition, there's a model, kind of a model of how we can approach God. So God has an essence which is unknown, beyond our. We can't know the essence, so to speak. Right? But then there are successive theophanies, or that essence, that unknowable essence, loved to be known. And that's why we say God, love is the cause, because the creation happened because that divine essence loved to be known. And so you have how it becomes known is through these qualities, divine qualities that are manifest in creation. So knowledge is a divine quality. God is the all-knowing, and so knowledge is embedded in everything. Knowledge is in the trees, in the stable, in me and you. The quality of knowing is there. And so you have people who learn from rocks. The rocks teach them. They find guidance in there. In the case of Mevlana, he sees things, and like he sees a stream, and that stream, that's the channel of the divine. He actually, some deep, beautiful insight comes to him from that, and then he expresses a deep wisdom about life and about being human from that. So these qualities, there's 99 is a tradition. There's a lot more. There's no counting of these qualities, but we have a tradition that says these 99 names, but they're by no means the whole thing. There's no limit to the qualities, and so you have the divine essence, which is unknowable, and then you have the divine qualities, which can be looked at as what's known in Sufi terminology or Sufi knowledge as the like the world of possibilities before creation, before it actually before anything happens in the world. These qualities are in potential, but not yet here. So anything that's possible is in these qualities. And then they manifest into the world, which become actions, which become God's acting in creation, or the divine action in creation. And so knowledge, divine knowledge, which is infinite, is in potential, and then it's manifest in us. So we know something. God's mercy is infinite in potential, and then it manifests in creation. Takes on life. It becomes. And so this flowing, that's what's called, the divine flow of attributes is constantly coming into creation from that. So that's kind of like a model of how that works. And that's how we experience. So then we come to know God, where He says, the traceless one keeps coming into traces. Remember that in that poem? The traceless one keeps coming into traces. And that's another coming from the Quran saying, look for the traces of your Lord. Look for it. Look for the traces. And Mevlana says, how? How can we find this placeless, traceless one? How? And he says, look for him in acts of beauty. That's how you can find him.